Welcome, everybody. I'm Bill Newell from MSO News Sports, joined here initially by Phil Stacy, Executive Sports Editor of the Salem News, Matt Williams, Assistant Sports Editor, and I think we might have some others joining us once we get rolling here, but welcome. And here we are, ticking down last couple of weeks of August here, gentlemen, and we finally have word this week on I'm still going to call it tentative fall sports kind of scheduling that's they're mapping out or did map out this past week. So Phil or Matt, I know Matt, you were covering it a lot. Let's throw it to you and have you begin and kind of update us on how you see things playing out here.
Sure. I think it really kind of has played out the way that we were speculating on the podcast for a few weeks, to where you're going to have some varsity competition in all sports except for football. There's going to be some rules modifications for soccer and for field hockey that we're going to learn about in the next week or two. And, we're going to proceed from there. I think that, September 18th is when the practices are due to begin. I think that, games would begin 2 weeks after that, or 1 week for golf. And we'll see what happens. Everything is tied to the color-coded COVID map. So if you're in a red section, you have to postpone your sports to that fall 2 season, which is in February, March, and April. Right now, I think, I haven't looked at the updated map. The last thing I read, I think it was 318 of the 350 communities were in the, the safe zone, safe colors, so to speak. So that's the vast majority of the state. There is a caveat that if your high school is not in-person learning or hybrid, your local school committee does have to sign off on participating in the sports. But, I think with the support of the Department of Health at the state level and the support of the MIAA, I imagine that would carry a lot of weight with the local school committees. But I guess it would be different in each town. A lot of questions still to be answered. I think, the one thing that really sticks out to me is the private school, regional school situation with this map. Just as for instance, the city of Lynn is very, very red right now. So obviously I think Lynn Classical and Lynn English are going to be playing their soccer and field hockey in that fall 2 season. What does that mean for Lynn Tech? What does that mean for St. Mary's? The Department of Secondary Education needs to clarify that at the state level, as soon as possible. I think that's really the one thing that sticks out to me as a big question that needs to be answered.
And would there be guidelines changed at that point too? I mean, I'm guessing there's going to be, at least in terms of those cities and towns that are in that red, as you mentioned, those are in the minority. Now, some that aren't may choose to push that stuff. They can do that, push that into that fall 2 season. But let's just say, for instance, that in the Northeastern Conference, the other schools that have the chance to play volleyball and cross country and golf and soccer and field hockey choose to do so during this current fall season. Did the Lynn schools just play each other? How do you get, say, even like 10 games out of that?
Can I just jump in for a minute here, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong here, but fall 2, when they talk about fall 2, they're talking about where they have football now, which starts at the end of February. Does that sound right? I got
That's
that?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So back to your original thought. So St. Mary's is a private school. So St. Mary's, they're saying that they think that they can start their fall schedule, as long as the other league teams in their league want to play in the fall, like a Fenwick or something like that. But but Lynn Tech, that name came up. They're a public high school. They're under the city of Lynn. And right now, as I understand it, their high school students are not going into school come September. They'll be out. They'll all be remote learning. So they'll be remote learning schools, while St. Mary's is not a remote learning school. They're planning. They have plans to open up with students in the building when
physically in a red zone, and so the DESE has not said how they're going to handle that, because
Yeah.
really, I mean, let's be honest, and all respect to the St. Mary's people, I think they have a good plan. They're a closed system, very well managed, but I mean, this is a virus, and if you're walking down Union Square, the virus doesn't care if you're wearing a Spartan jacket, a Ram jacket, or a Bulldog jacket. Like, if the virus is in town, it's in town. So this is a really complicated issue for the DESC to iron out here over the next few days.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if St. Mary's plays a game in Peabody and was to infect a private school in Peabody, those kids that live in Peabody, their infection numbers are going to go on the public school's record. So, I mean, theoretically, Peabody High School could have to shut down and cancel its season based on a spike that had nothing to do with a Peabody High School event. And that's where it gets really, really murky, because these numbers are not reported by school. There's no color-coded thing for a school. The color-coded thing is for each town. And, not to harp on the private school thing, it's a big issue for regional schools too. And for some of our small communities like, Hamilton and Wenham, if you don't, this stuff is per 100,000 people. So if you only have 10,000 people, it doesn't take very many cases to drive you into the red. And what happens if Wenham is red, but Hamilton is green? Does it go by physically where the building is located? I mean, there are still kids from that Wenham going to school and potentially spreading the virus. So, I mean, it's not just private schools. The regional schools, they have to clarify that as well.
I'm guessing that goes for charter schools too, because you mentioned Lynn, with KIPP Academy or Salem Academy in Salem. I think those are the only two local within the parameters of our readership area or listenership area. But I'm guessing that they would have to follow the guidelines of those cities. And Salem's red too, isn't it, Willie?
Salem's red. It's close. I mean, if there's a chance, I'm not a math major, obviously, but some of the numbers I was looking at, there's a chance that in the next week, Salem could dip down into the yellow. They don't have, as many cases as some of the very red zones, but again, it's close. But yeah, I mean, if they were to remain red before Labor Day, they would also be forced to postpone their sports with no choice. So there's. I think the state is assuming for scheduling that there will be enough schools that are remote that choose to postpone their seasons, that these people will have plenty of teams to play against. But I obviously that's all speculation at this point, because no one's really made a decision.
Why do you think a school would want to postpone at this point? I think everyone has been so gung-ho about trying to get things started back up again that I'm curious as to why a school may not want to offer fall athletics for student athletes who want to participate.
I think there's a risk aversion right now. I think, does your school committee listen to your athletic director? I mean, we've heard the governor say that if your town is green or white, there's no reason you shouldn't be in-person learning or hybrid learning. And we know of many communities that are remote learning anyway, even though they're in those green and white zones. So I think if they're going to apply that to learning, they may apply that caution to sports as well.
We have Nick Kukuru joining us, the sports editor of the Gloucester Times. He came in just in the last couple of minutes. But let me throw one more thing out there, and then I'll let you guys continue on, is that, so take an example. I may be wrong on this, but Beverly. So Beverly, their high school students are not going to be in the building unless that changes in the next few weeks. So they're not in the building. So they're not even a hybrid, even though they're not a red city, so to speak, due to the virus. How can, this goes back to what we've been saying all along, how is their school committee going to say, okay, Beverly, you can play fall sports, your soccer team can play, but you can't be in the building? I think we're going, it looks like we moved the ball down the field here this week with this announcement, but on the other hand, like you were saying, Willie, these school committees do hold the card, and I don't see them moving. I don't see the school committees moving on that piece. That's my guess, unless they begin to open up to students in the building.
Well, and it's the smallest sample size, though, too. I mean, you're talking a soccer team has what, 20, 22 kids? I'm not agreeing with it necessarily. I'm just saying. No. I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of the points that people make that are pro get the kids back out there, mental health, well-being, physical fitness, and things like that, they're all positives. And hey, we obviously have all of us have a vested interest in this because it's our business. But I don't think anybody is thinking recklessly and just wants to put kids together playing or playing opponents or whatnot. If there was a huge risk involved here, I think it's different in schools where the kids can be so close together, and that's why a lot of the schools don't want to deal with that. I think a lot of teachers don't want to have to deal with in-person learning. If they come from a different district than what the school is, or if they have classrooms without windows that open or poor ventilation or whatnot. I think outdoor sports is a different animal, and I think it should be viewed differently. There's plenty of room on a soccer field and sideline for social distancing. Same goes for field hockey, certainly golf, cross country, volleyball. They can make it happen with limited spectators and spreading the court, things like that. I just think it's a little bit of apples and oranges. And I do understand the point you bring up, Bill, but I don't think that the same rules and logic apply. That's just my thought.
Nick Kukuru.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it seems like the indoor stuff is the most dicey, more so for the high school kids than, the real younger kids. So I can't really, I don't know. I guess you got to make it on a city by city basis. I mean, I think if a Little League season was able to start and complete outdoors, just now, I feel like they can play some soccer, some field hockey.
I think it's the power of persuasion too. I think, for these school committees, right? Most of these people are not experts. They're listening to the people that come before them and present ideas and whatnot. So if they're hearing from a bunch of teachers that say, I don't feel safe in the building, then they're going to say, all right, let's do some remote learning. If they're hearing from a bunch of coaches that say, we're ready to do this, this is safe, then they're probably going to be persuaded to see it that way. So, and I think, you got to tip your cap to the MIA a little bit, because we were all so very frustrated that there was not more information available, that all this was taking so long to get done. But I think now that we're here at the beginning of this, I think it's clear that the fact that all this comes with the backing of the governor's office, the approval of the Office of Environmental Affairs, all these public health officials. I mean, honestly, if I'm on a school committee, how do I say that I know more about what's safe than all these PhDs and MDs that were on the EEA committee? I think having the gold backing of all those different people from the government really gives this a lot of weight and positivity. So, I mean, as frustrating as it was waiting for all this stuff, I think it does give it the best opportunity to actually happen.
Then as far as timing is concerned, there's still a lot more time before any of this starts, because we're talking about fall sports now. Originally, we had a date maybe of September 14. Now it's September 18, right? Because schools themselves wouldn't be opening for the first couple of weeks of September now because of the COVID-19 and the delay.
Yeah, it's a Friday, right, that they can start practicing and start playing.
That's right.
Okay, yeah, and 1 week
as opposed to a Monday. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, so I guess what I'm saying is we're still really a month away. I mean, we're still a month away from the first practice, so a lot can happen within a month. So, and a lot of good,
yeah.
and something good, something bad. So, I mean,
Hey, I've been in. I talk to a lot of our boys hockey coaches year round, and I've texted and spoken with 5 different guys this week since Monday about they pick my brain. What do I think is going to happen? I ask them, what modifications can be made and all. So this is all, what happens in the fall is going to have a reverberation effect through the other seasons. What does or doesn't happen maybe is a better way to put that. And like I told one of the guys, this could change in a day, in an hour. I mean, there's no guarantees for anything. It's a positive step. It's good to think that these things might happen. It's good for well-being of the student athletes and whatnot. But, there are no guarantees. This is not a usual year, so to speak. In fact, Willie, I think after you had tweeted all that stuff out yesterday, one of our persistent fans on the Twitter sphere said, so does that mean there isn't going to be any Thanksgiving football? Like, yeah, unless you and your buddies want to go down and play bubble football or something. Yeah, there's not going to be any Thanksgiving football.
Yeah, it seems unlikely. Well, there will be at Cowboy Stadium. I don't know if that counts, but
Yeah. Well, this will be the first Thanksgiving, at least I would plan on it anyway, that I wouldn't be working a football game in 31 years. Probably longer for you, Bill, right?
Yeah, I think I had an interruption of a year or two or something like that. Yeah, but yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah.
What do people
So,
do on Thanksgiving? I don't even know.
well, they watch the parades maybe. Then they watch some football. They start eating sooner than we used to, Phil. That's the
Okay.
difference, you know. So
Oh, you can have a meal when it's hot, you mean?
yeah, exactly.
Really? You're
Yeah.
allowed to do that? Wow. Okay.
I think so. Yeah, and with everybody else. Yeah. Hey,
Wow, nice.
you mentioned I was just going to get to this because you mentioned the coaches you were talking to, but I wanted to have you talk about the football coaches that you just talked about,
Yeah.
the story that you wrote in Thursday's Salem News, because this is going to be strange. Even if this whole thing holds together, we're now talking about the fall sports as we know it in the fall, except for football, which will start on February 24th, right? I mean, or something like
Yeah.
that.
Then
And
that would
so,
be I would assume going by the same guidelines, that would be the first day of practices. And you'd practice for 10 days before you play. So that gives what, Willie, do we figure out like 7 games maybe that can fit into that window before April 25th?
could
yeah,
we have Thanksgiving on Patriots Day and just start a new tradition of turkey on Patriots Day, something like that, or turkey sandwiches, something like that.
I saw somebody say play some Easter Sunday games. I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. But Thanksgiving's one thing.
work. It's
You know,
interesting because some schools could decide not to play the rivalry, skip it, leave it just
yeah.
for the holiday. Some schools might want to play. I mean, one thing I've been thinking about is the cold, and I was thinking about that Thanksgiving Day 2 years ago when it was so cold, right? And once the sun got overhead, that didn't feel so bad. So I wonder if even with the lights, we'll see more teams decide, all right, let's play in the sun. Let's play on
Yeah.
Saturday at 11 o'clock or 2 o'clock so it's not cold. Let's play on a Friday or a Thursday at 4 p.m. or 3:30 or something so that it's not so cold. Maybe we'll see more of that. That'll be different.
That is an interesting point. The Thanksgiving games, they play just a conference schedule, particularly in the NEC. I think all but Lynn Classical and Lynn English are crossovers.
That's right. Yeah, interesting. I mean,
I
That is
I
right.
I
Yeah.
just looked on my calendar, and Easter FYI for 2021 is on Sunday, April 4th, so it comes up pretty early, in April. But
I
so.
could
All
see
right.
arguments both ways. And the other thing is so you wouldn't necessarily need to have every Thanksgiving game the same week. So, in other words, where we're used to having to go to every one of these big, huge games, right, on the same day. Theoretically, I mean, you could have Beverly Salem in week 8. You could have Marblehead Swampscott in week 7. Ipswich Hamilton Wenham could be week 6. These things wouldn't all necessarily have to happen on the same day either without that holiday as the linchpin.
Nick, if I were you, I'd be pushing that Saturday morning game agenda. Those nights in early March down at Newell might be a little chilly.
Yeah, that's especially bad that time of year.
A lot of flooding. Newell Stadium gets flooded that
Yeah,
time
I
of
was
year.
gonna say, it might be underwater by
Yeah.
then.
I
Well,
mean,
it's funny. That was the one thing that the coaches said to me. They didn't care about the weather. I think they just want to play. They want to get out there with their teams and play, and they will certainly live with that. I mean, hey, we've all done, baseball or lacrosse or whatever games in early April. They're not fun, but it's not the worst thing in the world either. We're not going to have early to mid-September weather, but that's okay. We can deal with it. I mean, we've all done cold football games. We've done games in the snow and bitter winds. I mean, like I can recall Willie mentioned that game that day 2 years ago on Thanksgiving. That was Arctic, wind chill. I think legitimately made the temperature about 0, made it feel that way. Was it the year before? I think it was the year before that. There was a Friday night during the playoffs that was bitterly cold too. Felt like it was probably 18 degrees out. I remember being in Melrose that night watching Marblehead play for the North title, and that was a tough night. So you just deal with it. It's a couple hours outside. Doesn't sound like there's going to be that many fans allowed to go to the games anyway, so they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that's the other thing about the Friday nights. Like, if you're not worried about packing in as many fans as possible, what's the point of waiting until 7 p.m., right?
Right.
Yeah.
Here's another thing. Go ahead, Nick. I'm sorry.
There's no other – football's going to have that floating season all to itself. So, they should be have pretty much any availability that they want.
Unless, some schools decide we're going to move our, whatever, soccer to then. But
you may be better off. I'm trying to think about the stadiums. Logistically, you may be better off playing at like a practice field or something, because it's going to be easier to socially distance, right? If you can spread out. Like, I'm just thinking about like Beverly. I guess they have the grass there, but like, would it actually be easier to stay far away from other fans at like Frank 40 Field than it would be trying to do that in the bleachers at Hurd? I don't know. That's interesting. Same thing at St. John's, like that upper practice field. You can kind of spread out and bring your own chair and stuff. Is it easier to do that in a big wide open area than it is in the bleachers? I don't know. That's kind of interesting.
Let me be the. I feel like I'm the negative guy here a lot, but let me just spin it around.
That with you from Vermont. That's the thing.
I brought all that negativity down with me, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't start down here, no. So by that time, though, guys, we have the vaccine. We'll have all the therapeutics. What we could do is you could have a game of the week. You'll have 4 of them like they do in the NFL. You'll have Thursday night football, Friday afternoon football, Saturday, Sunday. You'll have all these games, feature games, and the stadiums will be packed with football fans because they'll all go to all these separate games. Not everyone will play on Friday night, like you said, Phil or Matt. They can bounce it around a little bit and have all these feature games and fill the stadiums and make up for all the problems we've had this past fall. What do you think? Glass is half full. That's me.
Hey, anything is possible.
Yeah,
Not buying it. I know.
No. Hey, we would welcome it. Are you kidding me? Like having games all week spread out like that, so you have like 2 or 3 games a day. That'd be great.
Yeah.
But there needs to be recovery time and things like that. And I just don't know how many people are going to be sitting in 30-degree weather in the bleachers and for a March 9th football game or whatever. But we shall see. A lot of the guys were very receptive. Resigned maybe is a strong word, but I think a lot of them knew in their hearts that it wasn't going to happen this fall. There were some coaches, specifically Brian St. Pierre over at St. John's Prep, who felt, and he brings up an excellent point, I don't understand why we can't play in the fall when there's no guarantee it's going to be any better. In fact, maybe the odds are greater that it won't be better in this fall 2 season. I don't know why we couldn't find a way to make it work safely and whatnot. So he was a little bit disappointed in that regard, but he realizes it's out of his hands. Some other coaches, guys like Jim Rudloff and Marblehead were already thinking ahead about how the schedule change is going to help and or hurt his team, and as far as the weather or things like that. He's telling me, well, at that time of year, it's going to favor more run-based teams and things like that. And he's probably right. So he's already scheming about that. And, a great question is how, now that these teams have so much more time to prepare for what they hope will be a football season, how do they and other athletes get into a weight room? If gyms are closed or limited hours or whatnot, how can, say, an offensive lineman get in and build up his strength the way he wants to if he doesn't have the equipment at home?
I'm again going to be on the optimistic side. I say give us another month or 2 months, let's say, from this point, and see what things look like, and see if kids can get into the weight room and do different things like that. Not in a crowded situation. A lot of times, high school weight rooms, because they're after school or before school, are very crowded situations. Everyone's let out. They get the bell rings, they're out. Some sports are in the weight room, some aren't. The hallways are crowded around gyms at that time of the day. But it'll have to be different. But I'm thinking that it could happen. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, maybe for this one school year, you don't have to take chemistry, and you can take bench press 101 instead. block
Yeah.
out 45 minutes for that, put away the beakers and the Bunsen burners. Just an idea. I'm just throwing it out there.
Sounds good to me. Yeah,
Yeah. Hey.
absolutely.
I think, it's important to know that everything we're talking about is with the caveat. You could throw the asterisk on there, if this fall 2 season is played, because I think we're all a little dubious about if it's really about the virus and, is the conditions really going to be supportive of this in February, right? But I mean, hey, this is the plan we have. We're going to discuss it, assume it's going to happen, and hope for the best. But that's why I think personally it's so important to get in as many sports as you can now while the conditions are pretty good. Let's deal with what's in front of us, like Belichick says, and not worry too much about the future, And I think getting back to one of Bill's questions earlier, like why would a school committee approve this if you're remote? It's like, well, if you think that the health conditions aren't going to be so hot in February and fall too, then it behooves you to get in as many activities now as you can, while the conditions are pretty good, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, at some point, we're going to get data. I think I mentioned this the other week with kids going back into the building, wherever that is. It may not be in Beverly and it may not be in Salem or Lynn, but it'll be in other cities where they're going back into the building, albeit part-time, and getting in, and we'll see how that plays out, and hopefully better than it did for the, the Cardinals or whatever, so.
Notre Dame, Holy Cross, UMass.
Yeah. So
that's been good in the NFL. It's all about discipline. That's what I think. I think it's about discipline. College football, NFL have been pretty good because those guys are basically in the military barracks there. They got, curfew. They're not out, whereas if you're on a baseball road trip, you're interested in having maybe a little bit more fun. I think that's really why it's been good. So, I mean, high school kids and discipline don't always have a peanut butter and jelly about them, but hey, knock on wood, behave yourselves, kids. Do your job, as Belichick would say. Have they started selling "Do Your Job" masks yet? Can we get those?
I saw fine print in this thing they released, and there's something about no reporters allowed for any of the 4 seasons at these games. Did you read that? Yeah. We're free. We're off the hook. We're golden. Yeah. So.
I thought it was going to be one of those Globe Herald other signs. I remember they put that up at a couple of games at Manning Field. Globe Herald other. It's like, yeah, thanks. We're here every week, but thanks. Make room for the 17-year-old intern from Illinois that happens to be working from the Globe that wouldn't know the difference between their Everett Crimson Tide and Denzel Washington's Crimson Tide.
CBS signing in at Manning Field. Is that what you're saying?
Was that too harsh? Was that deserving of a wow?
Well, gentlemen, we're down to our last couple of minutes here. Any final thoughts from any of you that want to pipe in on anything from the past week? Or
well, do we touch on that Rule 40 yet, where coaches are allowed to coach out of season? I feel like that could create a tough situation where coaches are going to be potentially pulling kids in a lot of different directions, especially if it's opened up to all sports. I feel like the fall will be fine. And what's going to happen in the winter when you've been, working out all winter with the football team and then you got hockey? And if I'm a hockey coach, I want my kids playing, their full attention to hockey.
And what that rule is allows, normally a football coach can't coach out of season, but now a football coach could be helping coach his kids during this fall or winter because they've waived that. That's what we're talking about, right, Nick?
Yeah. Baseball, lacrosse.
Yeah, any coach, right.
Coaches too,
you have to be especially sympathetic to the spring coaches who already lost an entire season. And I think they might be looking at that fall too a little bit leerily. Is that a word, leerily? Leery is a word? Okay.
Dennis?
With some leery.
What if you're, a lacrosse coach and one of your best players is a tailback on the football team and he gets dinged up there? Ordinarily, he might be able to rest up and be ready for lacrosse. Now he's not. So, Same thing goes with baseball or, tennis or whatnot.
I think, I'm glad that they did this because I think that for the schools that are very restrictive, I mean, it's kind of crazy that your baseball coach shouldn't be talking to his baseball kids, right? But I would say, just use common sense. Like, if you're setting up a competitive hockey team in, at the Ice House in Exeter, New Hampshire, and you're asking some kid on the soccer team to skip soccer practice to go play in that game. I mean, shame on you, right? Like, don't do that. Don't ruin it for everyone. Use your common sense, work with your fellow coaches. And I think, we've heard from the successful schools, places like Danvers, for instance. I remember last year, Coach George Lavasser being so effusive in his praise of the rest of his coaches who were rooting for his team. The field hockey coach and the team would be there cheering his team on, and they would go to each other's playoff games. So, work with your fellow coaches in your building, and everything here will be fine. I think this is a very good thing. And if you're going to abuse it to pull a kid in too many different directions, then shame on you. And I think that in these times, we have to trust the individual principals and ADs to know when enough is enough, and to, everybody work together. We're all in this together. Don't try to take advantage of this. And I think, the vast majority of the people that we deal with, the three of us here on the North Shore, I think are going to do this with good intentions and not abuse it.
Yeah,
And the idea being,
coaches would be fine with everything that Willie said.
and the idea here is that, like Phil mentioned, you have a spring coach. The kids have been out of the building, they've been out of school. You want them to have the contact with the adults to get the instruction, and not be held to this rigid calendar that has worked and worked for a lot of reasons before. But now in this year, 2020, going into 2021, we've got to rethink what we were doing. So it's done on the best. Yeah.
I would say real quick before we head out, I think a lot of these student athletes are going to be feeling pressure from club coaches to continue to play for them, whether it's AAU basketball or spring soccer or whatnot. Because let's face it, those kids are their meal ticket. They need those kids to pay money to pay their salaries and programs. So I hope there isn't undue pressure put on families because of a extremely unique year where high school is trying to make things happen, and maybe the club teams of the world don't have the same restrictions that they follow.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think some of the thinking and beginning to advance the ball down the field, if you will, to start fall sports, is because all these athletes are going to go to these other programs, many of them anyways, without the restrictions, or without, so many restrictions. All right, on that note, I think we'll end. Gentlemen, great seeing you again this week.